My son Daniel and his wife Claire told me they had faith in me. They asked if I'd look after their place while they were gone for just 5 days. As they headed out, they flashed warm smiles and even left me a bottle of wine as a sweet gesture, but they didn't switch off the security cameras, or maybe they chose not to. At first, I had no clue I was being watched. Then I stumbled across the video footage. I heard Claire's laugh, sharp and mocking, as she called me, that old housekeeper who'll deal with anything. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about trust at all, it was a setup. But I wasn't the same quiet woman anymore. Not this time. This time, the cameras didn't catch me slipping, they revealed who they really were. If this story's tugging at your heart, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know what city or country you're tuning in from. I'm genuinely curious about where you're listening from. I'm Margaret Ellis, 62 years young, and I spent most of my grown-up years as a school librarian in a sleepy little town just outside Boston. Books were my safe haven, and I found comfort in the hush of silence. I loved routines, sipping tea at the same time every morning, keeping everything tidy and in its place. After my husband passed, the quiet grew heavier, but it was a familiar weight. I lived alone in the home we'd bought together until the stairs got too steep and the winters dragged on too long. Daniel and Claire came to me with what seemed like a kind offer 3 years back. "Why not come live with us?" they said. "We've got plenty of room, and it'll be simpler for all of us." I wasn't sure at first, I didn't want to be in their way, but they kept insisting it was about family, that I'd have my own space, and the kids would love having their grandma close by. So, I packed up and moved into their big, modern 2-story house in a suburb north of Providence. It was stunning, all sharp lines and polished surfaces, almost too perfect. The countertops gleamed white, the appliances shone like brushed steel, and the hallways echoed with a kind of empty precision. No clutter, no family photos, no warmth. The walls were painted in shades of ivory and slate, with abstract art that felt distant and uninviting. I had my own little room on the first floor, with a door I could shut, but it didn't really shield me from the rest of the house. Not when Claire always had something to say about how I organized my closet, folded the towels, or whether I dared use the fancy hand soap in the guest bathroom. Still, I did my best to fit in. I picked up the kids from school, washed dishes without being asked, and made sure I didn't leave any mark in the common areas. It was like an odd balancing act, being useful without being noticed, being there without really existing. Claire's smiles were always polite, but they stayed stiff, never reaching her eyes. Then, one Tuesday morning in early April 2025, Claire tapped on my door. She was already dressed in crisp linen, clutching a tablet in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. She told me she and Daniel were headed to Hawaii for 5 days, just the two of them, leaving the kids behind. A romantic escape, something they hadn't done in ages. "We know you've got this," she said. "And honestly, we feel better knowing you're here instead of on your own at your age." She flashed that polished smile again, and I just nodded. She mentioned the fridge was fully stocked, the garden only needed a light sprinkle, and I should make myself at home. She even left a bottle of Merlot on the counter with a note in her flawless handwriting, "For your cozy nights. Thanks for all you do, Margaret." I should have felt warmed by their thoughtfulness. I should have been touched by their gesture. But instead, a quiet unease settled in my chest, not quite fear or doubt, just a nagging feeling, like walking into a room so spotless it felt unnatural, like even the air had been scrubbed clean. The morning they left, Claire gave me a quick, stiff hug. Daniel pecked my cheek. The kids gave sleepy waves from the car. I stood on the porch, watching their car glide down the smooth street, tires humming softly. Then, suddenly, I was alone, or so I thought. The house felt eerily still when I stepped inside that first morning. My fingers brushed the smooth, cold marble of the kitchen island, its surface gleaming under the soft light like it had been polished for a photo shoot. My eyes caught the bottle of Merlot Claire had left on the counter, its elegant label and handwritten note screaming thoughtfulness, but something about it felt too perfect, too staged. I swung open the fridge door, and just as Claire promised, it was stocked to the brim, rows of neatly labeled containers holding pre-sliced vegetables, jars of sauces, and stacks of Tupperware so organized it could have been a display at a gourmet store. The blinds hung halfway down, letting slivers of morning sunlight slice across the polished hardwood floors, casting long, delicate shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. I wandered into the living room and stood in its center, trying to soak in the quiet. It should have felt peaceful, like a moment of calm in a beautiful home, but it was too pristine, too curated, like a model house waiting for a realtor to show it off to strangers. I shook my head, muttering to myself that I was being silly. Here I was, in a stunning house with a garden, my books, and 5 whole days to myself. What was there to complain about? I brewed a cup of tea, settled into my favorite armchair by the window, the one with the faded cushion that Claire never seemed to notice, and cracked open my novel. But no matter how hard I tried to sink into the pages, a nagging unease clung to me, like a faint hum just out of earshot. It wasn't the creak of an old house settling or the groan of pipes. It was the feeling that the house itself was watching me, its silence not empty but attentive. I didn't know it then, but I was right. The first day passed gently, almost like a dream you're not sure you're enjoying. I spent the morning in the garden, my hands buried in the soft earth as I tended to the lavender plants, their sweet, herbal scent rising with every snip of my shears. I moved on to the rose bushes along the fence, carefully trimming away dead leaves, the thorns catching faintly at my gloves. The air was warm but carried a soft spring breeze, and the sunlight filtered through the young leaves above, painting the ground with dappled patches of gold. I wore the old straw hat Daniel had given me for my birthday 4 years back, wide-brimmed and a little frayed, the kind of thing I knew Claire found too rustic for her sleek, modern aesthetic. With them gone, I didn't care about fitting in. I let myself kneel in the dirt, the cool soil seeping through my jeans, and hummed an old folk tune under my breath, the kind my mother used to sing while hanging laundry. It felt good to let go, to not worry about leaving a smudge or stepping out of line. Back inside, the house remained spotless, almost unnaturally so. Out of habit, I wiped my shoes on the mat before crossing the threshold, though the floors were so clean they practically sparkled. I'd spent so long trying to make myself invisible in this house, tiptoeing around Claire's rules, avoiding her sharp glances, that relaxing felt like learning a new language. I filled the kettle, the familiar hiss of water heating up grounding me, and chose a chamomile tea bag from the tin I kept tucked in the cupboard. I reached for my chipped ceramic mug, the only one that showed any sign of use, its tiny imperfection a quiet rebellion against the row of flawless, museum-like mugs lined up beside it. Sipping my tea by the kitchen window, I watched a pair of sparrows dart across the patio stones, their quick hops and soft chirps filling the quiet. The house was calm, almost too calm, its stillness sharp and heavy. I found myself wondering if it always felt this way, or if the absence of voices, Claire's clipped instructions, the kids' chatter, Daniel's tired sighs, had made the silence feel like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break it. I wandered through the downstairs, my footsteps echoing faintly in the open space. The dining room table gleamed under a chandelier that looked more like art than a light fixture, its surface bare except for a single decorative bowl that probably cost more than my old car. The living room smelled faintly of Claire's lavender citrus diffuser, a scent that was pleasant but oddly sterile, like it was trying too hard to be inviting. I ran my hand along the back of the couch, its fabric smooth and unworn, as if no one ever sat there long enough to leave a mark. The bookshelves caught my eye, their spines arranged by color rather than title, more for show than for reading. I pulled one down, a hardcover with a glossy jacket, and its pages were stiff, uncreased, like it had never been opened. Everything in this house felt like it belonged in a magazine, not a home. I tried to shake off the thought, telling myself I was lucky to be here, surrounded by beauty and quiet. But that uneasy feeling lingered, like a whisper I couldn't quite make out, telling me I wasn't as alone as I thought. The house wasn't just silent, it was watching, waiting, and I hadn't yet realized how right my instincts were. I wandered slowly through the downstairs, taking in the rooms I usually moved through so carefully. The dining room looked like something out of a design magazine, silverware gleaming in its drawer, linen napkins folded with precision. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and citrus, probably from one of Claire's fancy diffusers. The books on the shelves were arranged by color, more for show than for reading. I picked one up, and its pages felt stiff, untouched. The guest bathroom lights flicked on automatically when I stepped inside. The bathroom mirror was flawless, not a single smudge. I caught my reflection and lingered a bit longer than usual, studying my face. My eyes looked weary, I noticed, but there was a spark of alertness, maybe even curiosity, like I was waiting for something to happen. That evening, I whipped up a simple supper, just some soup and a slice of toast. I ate quietly, then washed and dried the dishes right away, leaving no trace. I curled up in the living room with a book for an hour, then headed to my bedroom to tackle a crossword puzzle. As I slipped into bed, I spotted it, a tiny red light flickering in the corner of the ceiling. At first, I figured it was part of a smoke detector or maybe a security system, but the blinking had a steady, almost lifelike rhythm, like a small, watchful eye in the shadows. I switched off the lamp and stared up at it. It was too small for a smoke alarm, too high for a regular camera, but I'd spent enough years in a school to recognize a surveillance device when I saw one. The more I looked, the more certain I grew. I tugged the comforter up to my chin, lying still, my heart steady but awake. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe they'd put up cameras for safety, after all, it was a big house. Maybe they were worried about burglars. Maybe it was just standard. But why hadn't they mentioned it, and why was there one in my room? The next morning, I tried to push the thought aside. I went for a stroll, stopped by the corner bakery for a scone, and sat in the park, watching a mom teach her kid to ride a bike. For a little while, I let myself forget the unease. But when I got back, the house felt different, not just silent, but tense, like it was holding its breath. I started noticing things, a faint click when I stepped into the laundry room, a motion sensor lighting up the hallway even in broad daylight, and the way Alexa chimed out of nowhere after I muttered something to myself in the kitchen. I remembered a casual remark Claire made a couple of months back: "We love our smart home, it listens better than the kids do." That night, I stood beneath that blinking light in my bedroom. I dragged a chair over, climbed up, and peered closely. There it was, a tiny pinhole lens, cleverly tucked into what looked like a smoke detector, but it wasn't one. It was a camera. And then it hit me, it had probably been recording me the whole time. I stepped down carefully, my hands shaking, not from fear but from a dawning realization. This wasn't about keeping the house safe. They were watching me. Whatever calm I'd started to feel shattered under that tiny, blinking light. I stood in the middle of my room, scanning every corner. How many more cameras were there? How long had they been running? And why did Claire hand me that bottle of wine with such a calculated smile? The house was still, but now it felt alive, like it was eavesdropping and observing me. I no longer felt like a guest, I felt like a lab rat in someone else's experiment. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay under the covers, staring at that little red light pulsing like a heartbeat. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Claire on a beach, drink in hand, casually pulling up an app on her phone to watch me toss in bed, noting what I wore, how I moved, catching the little mutterings I made when I read, or even if I shed a tear. The next morning, I shuffled into the kitchen, my body moving on instinct as I set about brewing coffee. My mind was a jumble, thoughts scattering like beads from a broken necklace, rolling into corners I couldn't reach. I gripped my chipped ceramic mug, the one imperfection in Claire's pristine cupboard, and tried to steady my hands as I poured the coffee, its rich, bitter aroma curling through the air. Sipping slowly, I stared out at the living room, its polished surfaces catching the pale morning light. The space was silent, almost too silent, with the kind of stillness that felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. My stomach twisted, a knot of unease and anger, but one thing was crystal clear: I had to uncover every hidden camera in that house. The thought burned in my chest, sharp and urgent, pushing away the fog of doubt. I wasn't going to let those invisible eyes keep watching me. I started in the living room, moving with deliberate care, my steps soft against the hardwood floor. To anyone watching, I might have looked like I was just tidying up, my hands clutching a dusting cloth as I trailed it along the shelves. But my eyes were sharp, scanning every inch of the room, every corner, every gadget, every shadow. I ran my fingers over the spines of Claire's color-coded books, their glossy covers more decorative than loved, and there, tucked between a leather-bound novel and a sleek art book, was a small round object. It was barely noticeable, its tiny lens concealed behind a black sticker that blended with the shelf's dark wood. My heart thudded as I peeled back the sticker, revealing the glint of glass, a camera, small but unmistakable. I stepped back, my breath catching, and kept searching. In the corner of the ceiling, where the walls met in a sharp angle, I spotted another one, disguised as a motion sensor. Its sleek design matched the room's modern aesthetic, but now I saw it for what it was, a silent observer, tracking every move I made. I moved to the kitchen next, my pulse quickening as I scanned the space I'd once thought of as neutral, even comforting. The counters gleamed under the overhead lights, and the fridge hummed softly, but the air felt charged, like the house was holding its breath. I stood on my tiptoes, running my eyes over the shelves and appliances, and there, above the fridge, was what looked like a stylish kitchen timer, brushed steel, minimalist, the kind of thing Claire would pick out. But when I leaned closer, my heart sank. A tiny lens, no bigger than a pinhead, stared back at me, so subtle you'd miss it unless you were looking for it. I froze, my fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. Now that I knew what to look for, it was like a veil had lifted. The cameras were everywhere, hiding in plain sight, woven into the fabric of this too-perfect home. I drifted into the dining room, my movements slow but purposeful, the dusting cloth still in my hand as a prop. The chandelier hung above the table, its crystals catching the light in a dazzling display, but I wasn't fooled by its beauty anymore. I climbed onto a chair, my knees wobbling slightly, and peered into the fixture. There it was, a camera, nestled among the glittering prisms, its lens angled to capture the entire table. I could picture it now, every quiet meal, every moment I'd sat there folding napkins or helping the kids with homework, all recorded, all watched. My throat tightened, but I pushed forward, moving to the hallway. The thermostat on the wall, a sleek black square with a digital display, seemed innocent enough, but when I tilted my head, I saw it, a tiny black dot embedded in the casing, another watchful eye. In the laundry room, the air smelled faintly of detergent and fabric softener, but the cozy familiarity was shattered when I found yet another lens, this one tucked on a shelf above the dryer, half hidden behind a stack of neatly folded towels. Each discovery felt like a small betrayal, stacking up until the weight pressed against my chest. The house, with its flawless surfaces and curated elegance, wasn't a home, it was a stage, and I'd been an unwitting performer. I stood in the laundry room, staring at that last camera, my hands trembling not from fear but from a simmering resolve. I wasn't just a guest here, tiptoeing around Claire's rules. I was a woman who'd been studied, catalogued, and exposed. But now, I was awake to it, and I wasn't going to let those hidden lenses define me anymore. The walls seemed to press in closer. I grabbed a small notebook from the junk drawer and started jotting down each camera's location, writing quietly, carefully. I moved through the house like a shadow, no longer the houseguest but a detective in a mystery I hadn't signed up for. Then I reached the upstairs office, a room Claire had always kept off limits. She'd once said it was her freelance workspace, full of sensitive documents. The door was usually locked, but that day, when I turned the knob, it opened. I paused, then stepped inside. The office was different from the rest of the house, not messy, but alive with clutter. Wires snaked across the floor, and shelves were packed with labeled boxes and tech gear. On the desk sat a laptop, a monitor, and a small console flashing green and amber lights. I eased into the chair in front of the computer. The screen was on, no password needed. The desktop showed a photo of the kids on a hiking trail, smiling brightly. There were folders labeled Logs and Footage. I clicked on Footage. Inside were files sorted by date and room: Kitchen 2025, April 2nd. Living Room 2025, April 1st. Guest Room 2025, March 31st. I opened one. The video played silently, showing me in the living room, reading my book. I watched myself sip tea, scratch my arm, rub my forehead, shift on the couch, completely unaware. I looked so vulnerable, so exposed. I closed it and opened another. There I was again, in my robe in the kitchen, washing a dish, staring out the window, muttering to myself. Every moment I thought was private was captured, weeks, maybe months of footage. I had no idea how long they'd been recording me. One folder was labeled Clips. Inside were short videos, some just 15 seconds, tagged with labels like weird comments, muttering, crying. They were dissecting me, studying me, sorting my life like I was some kind of specimen. My hands hovered over the mouse, frozen. Then I clicked one last video, one that wasn't of me. It was Claire, sitting in this very office, laughing during a video call with someone I didn't know. She held a glass of wine, her tone light but cutting. She still hasn't figured out she's being recorded. It's honestly kind of pathetic, she said. She talks to herself more than she talks to the kids. It's like she's narrating her own loneliness. The person on the call laughed. Claire kept going, I'm telling you, it's intriguing. We could probably edit this into a little film, portrait of the forgotten matriarch. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just sat there, in that chair, in that cold, blinking world they'd built around me, and it hit me, I'd been living in a dollhouse, a pristine, polished cage where I was the display. I didn't close the folder. I didn't shut the laptop. I left the laptop open, Claire's voice still looping faintly in the background as I stood up, because I'd learned all I needed to know. They'd welcomed me into their house, but it was never a home. They'd handed me a glass cage, and I was done playing their captive. I shut the office door behind me with a gentle touch, more instinct than choice. It was the same careful habit I'd picked up when Daniel was a baby, easing drawers closed, turning handles softly, wrapping my movements in quiet to keep him sleeping. But now, the silence wasn't about comfort. It was about shielding myself. The office felt colder than the rest of the house, even though the thermostat said otherwise. Maybe it was the lack of human warmth, the way the walls seemed to hold their breath. Everything in that room felt deliberate, calculated. Every item was chosen, positioned, watched. I stood in the center, letting my eyes settle into the dim light. On the far wall was a sleek black cabinet with 2 locked drawers. Cables snaked from it to a custom setup on the desk, a rig with ports blinking like it had its own pulse. I stepped closer, eyeing the system carefully. In all my years at the library, I'd never seen anything quite like it. To the left, under the window, sat a filing cabinet. I pulled open the top drawer, neatly labeled manuals, warranties, receipts, for security systems, cloud storage plans, surveillance software. One invoice caught my eye, from a company I didn't know, but its purpose was clear, custom remote monitoring package. It listed every room in the house, including my own. They'd paid to keep tabs on me in real time. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out an old flash drive, one I'd used to store snapshots of Daniel as a little boy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I plugged it into the desktop's USB port, and a prompt flickered onto the screen. I started copying everything from the footage folder. It was just a drag and drop, but it felt like a quiet rebellion. While the files transferred, I explored the room further. On the second shelf above the desk were notebooks, not personal journals, but logs for some kind of project. One was labeled House Data. Inside were meticulous records, motion alerts, timestamps, keywords. One entry read, 7:12 p.m., Margaret talks to herself about birds. Tone, sentimental. Another, 9:45 a.m., seems to be studying wedding photo. Possible emotional response. They weren't just watching me, they were analyzing me. It was cold, clinical, not even unkind, just detached. That made it worse. In those notes, I wasn't family. I was a case study in someone's experiment. On the bottom shelf, I found a black leather binder labeled Security Authorization. Inside were forms, software access permissions, equipment details, and one page that sent a chill through me, a clause about sharing data for research or media purposes. Claire's signature was there, precise and familiar, in blue ink, the same handwriting she used for birthday cards or grocery lists on the fridge. Now it sat next to a paragraph that gave someone, maybe multiple people, permission to observe and judge me. The files finished copying. I ejected the flash drive and slipped it deep into my bag, under a worn paperback I'd been rereading. Then I paused. There was one drawer I hadn't checked, the lowest one on the right side of the desk. I knelt and slid it open. Inside were dozens of printed photos of me, stills from the cameras, me in the kitchen, me sleeping, me watching TV, me brushing my hair. Some were in color, some labeled by hand, Margaret, early morning. Margaret with book. Margaret crying. Something inside me broke in that moment, not a loud shatter, not a sob, but a quiet fracture, like a hairline crack in glass, deep and permanent. I grabbed as many photos as my purse could hold, not all, just enough to prove what I'd found. I didn't know yet how I'd use them, but I knew I would. I left the office as I'd found it. Let them wonder what I'd discovered. Let them sweat over what I might do next. As I stepped out, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I looked older, not from age, but from what I now understood. They'd invited me in with warm smiles, but trust was never part of the deal. They'd built an elegant, invisible cage and expected me to stay inside without a peep. But they forgot one thing: I'd lived a full life before their cameras existed. And now I was ready to live another one, free from their gaze. The house felt different once I saw it for what it was. The air carried a heavy stillness, like a room someone had just slipped out of without you noticing. I couldn't move from one room to another without feeling unseen eyes following me. The click of my shoes on the tile, the scrape of a chair across the floor, every sound seemed to echo with new meaning. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was a sharp, cold clarity that cut through everything. I stopped playing along. For 2 days, I glided through the house in careful silence. I unplugged devices, claiming I was saving electricity, nudged picture frames to block hidden lenses, and draped scarves over suspicious gadgets. I opened windows I'd never touched before. I left the TV running for hours, playing old black and white movies on mute, just to mess with their expectations. When I passed the hallway mirror, I really looked at myself. I wasn't just an aging mother-in-law in someone else's home. I was a woman taking back her power. I knew I'd have to face them eventually, but it would be on my terms, not when I was raw or feeling like their prey. So, I planned. I printed a few of the photos I'd found, stills from their hidden cameras. One from the kitchen, one from my bedroom, one of me reaching into a drawer. They were ordinary moments, almost dull, but that's what made them so violating. They were the private pieces of my life I thought were mine alone. I wrote a brief note and tucked it with the photos into an envelope. Then I mailed it to myself, certified, with a postmark. It was a trick I'd learned years ago during a library property dispute, a quiet way to lock in the truth. Evidence, just in case this went beyond family. Then I went to my room and recorded myself speaking. It wasn't dramatic or loud. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one Claire always shifted an inch to the left when I tidied it. I stared straight into the lens of the one camera I hadn't touched. And I spoke. I talked about what it felt like to be welcomed with kindness but treated with suspicion. I described the loneliness of trying to be helpful while being watched like a stranger. I spoke of the absurdity of being turned into a lab rat in a place where I was supposed to feel safe. Then I spoke the heart of it. I was through playing their game, not just the act, but the silent pact I'd never signed up for, the one that expected me to stay small, quiet, and agreeable just to be near family. The video ran for 12 minutes. I wrapped it up with a single, clear line: I've always been more than what you chose to see. I uploaded it to a private cloud drive and emailed the link to myself, plus one to Robert, an old colleague from the library who now practiced family law. We hadn't talked in years, but he'd always said, "If you ever need help, Margaret, you reach out." It was time to take him up on that. With the digital files and physical proof safely tucked away, I started taking back the house in small, deliberate ways. I cooked breakfast and let the smell of bacon linger in the air. In the early afternoon, I played Beethoven on the stereo, letting the music spill into every corner. I pulled my knitting from the closet and sat in the living room, needles clicking without apology. I lit scented candles, walked barefoot on the cool floors, and called old friends, laughing loudly when the mood struck. It wasn't defiance, it was me claiming my place. I wasn't dreading their return anymore. I was ready, steady with purpose. On the morning they were due back, I brewed coffee and arranged the printed photos neatly on the kitchen counter. I stood in the hallway, glanced up at the tiny lens in the ceiling, and offered a smile, not warm, not soft, just real. Then I stepped outside, grabbed the garden hose, and watered the roses with slow, careful attention, the way I'd always done things, quietly, patiently, with care. That evening, they came through the door, faces pink from their Hawaiian sun, brimming with the smug ease of a good vacation, expecting the same meek woman they'd left behind. But I wasn't her anymore, and the cameras would show them everything they needed to see. They pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I was already in the garden, cradling a cup of tea, just like the day they'd left. The sky had turned a deep purple, and the porch light blinked on. I didn't get up to greet them. I didn't wave. I just sipped my tea, watching their shadowy figures climb out of the car. Their voices drifted through the hedges, Claire's laugh sharp and bright, the kind she used to seem effortless. Daniel trailed her with their suitcase, his head tilted toward the front door. They didn't notice me at first. I heard the jangle of keys, the familiar click of the lock, the soft groan of the door swinging open. Then came a pause, not a natural one, but the kind that hits when something's off, when the world shifts just enough to feel wrong. Claire's voice cut through, quieter now, unsure. Daniel muttered something, probably asking what was wrong. I pictured it, the kitchen lights glowing, the photos laid out on the counter, my handwritten note beside them, the cameras still in place but no longer their little secret. They didn't call out for me. I stayed in the garden, the tea cold in my hands, but I held it anyway, it grounded me. After what felt like 20 minutes, Daniel stepped outside. His eyes swept the yard until they landed on me. He hesitated, then walked over slowly. His face was unreadable, not mad, not puzzled, just blank, like he hadn't yet picked which mask to wear. He asked if we could talk. I nodded and pointed to the chair across from me. He sat, stiff, hands clasped tightly in his lap. A heavy silence stretched between us, begging to be filled, but I held back. I wanted to hear what story he'd spin. He started with the usual excuses. It wasn't personal, the cameras were for security, they'd just forgotten to turn them off while they were away. His voice was flat, like he'd rehearsed it on the drive home, aiming for something between an apology and an explanation. I let him talk. He went on, saying they never meant to make me uneasy, that I was family, that they'd never spy on me. Then he used the word that finally broke my silence, trust. I looked at him, my voice soft but steady, and asked if he'd feel trusted if someone recorded his private moments for months without a word. I asked if he'd call that protection or control. He didn't answer right away. Claire appeared then, her lips pressed tight, arms folded across her chest. She didn't sit. She stood behind Daniel and said she was hurt that I'd gone through their things, that I'd snooped, that I'd sent files to a lawyer. So, she knew. I met her eyes and said that if she felt betrayed by being exposed, maybe she should think about how I felt being studied in my most unguarded moments. I reminded her of the locked office I wasn't supposed to enter, the signed data sharing agreements, the video files labeled with terms like crying and off behavior. Her face flinched, but she didn't argue back. I told them I wasn't after an apology. I wasn't even angry anymore, I was certain. I'd lined up a meeting with a lawyer, and my contributions to their home would be accounted for and repaid. I let them know I had copies of all the footage, the equipment logs, and a second set of files stored with a trusted friend. Claire started to snap something defensive, but Daniel touched her arm, stopping her. For the first time, he looked at me, not like a son managing his mother, but like a man realizing he'd misjudged someone he thought he understood. He asked what I wanted. I told him plainly, I wanted space, legal, physical, emotional. I wanted a home of my own again, a place where I could live without being watched, controlled, or made to feel small. I wanted my dignity, and if they couldn't give it willingly, I'd take it myself. Silence fell again, this time softer, heavier. Daniel said he understood. Claire stayed quiet and turned back toward the house. I stood, left my empty teacup on the table, and walked past Daniel into the house. He didn't follow. I went to my room, shut the door, and started packing. There wasn't much to gather, a few sweaters, my books, some letters from old friends, the blanket I'd had since my college days. I didn't want their things. I wanted what was mine. That night, I slept with the blinds open, moonlight pooling across the floor. I didn't bother checking for cameras. I didn't need to anymore. I knew what I needed now. And I knew that when I left this house, I'd never return the same way again, because something had changed. They'd never see me as the quiet woman who stayed in line. I'd been silent, but I was never blind. The next few days, I moved with purpose, a steady rhythm guiding every hour. I walked through the house differently, not tiptoeing, not shrinking, but deliberate. I was no longer a guest in someone else's idea of family. I was a woman mapping out her way forward. The morning after our garden talk, I dialed Robert's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice as warm and steady as I remembered. We hadn't spoken in years, but some friendships don't fade, they just wait patiently until you need them. I laid it all out plainly, no theatrics, the hidden cameras, the betrayal of trust, the years I'd poured into their home, their kids, and keeping the peace. He listened quietly, not interrupting once. Then he asked me to send over the files. He suggested we start with a review of my financial contributions to their property and build from there. You don't have to tear it all down, he said. You just need to show them you helped lay the groundwork. That stuck with me, like a quiet truth I could hold on to. By the end of the week, we'd put together a proposal, not a weapon, but a line drawn in the sand, a legal acknowledgement of everything I'd given to their lives and their home. For years ago, I'd helped with the down payment on their house. Claire had called it a gift, but there was no paperwork, just a bank transfer and a string of emails where she thanked me for investing in our family's future. Those words would come in handy. Robert drafted a letter, polished, calm, but unwavering. It detailed my contribution, adjusted for inflation, and the home's increased value. It offered two options, repayment or a formal equity share that could fund a new place for me. I handed the sealed envelope to Daniel one evening as he stood in the doorway of my room. He didn't open it right away. He looked worn out, not from guilt, I figured, but from the dawning realization that I wasn't just a background figure in their home, but someone who'd kept it running from the shadows. Claire avoided me that week. She drifted through the house like a shadow, always a room ahead or behind me. The cameras stayed off, I left them that way. A few days later, Daniel called me from work. He said they'd read the letter, that they didn't want to fight, that they wanted to make things right. The next afternoon, we sat down in the dining room. I wore the navy sweater Thomas gave me one Christmas years ago. He used to call it my power sweater, saying it made me look like someone who wouldn't back down. He would have loved this moment. Robert joined us on a video call. Claire sat with her arms folded, saying little. Daniel took the lead, explaining they'd repay my investment in full, using their home equity line, and offer a stipend to help me relocate. They'd also remove all the cameras and provide a written admission of the privacy violation. I listened quietly, nodded, and didn't gloat. This wasn't about shaming them. It was about taking back what I'd given without recognition, my time, my effort, my presence. By the end of the meeting, we signed the agreement. Robert grinned through the screen and said, "That's a clean break." Something in my chest loosened, like a knot finally coming undone. The next week, I started hunting for a new place. I didn't need anything fancy, just somewhere that was mine. A little garden, maybe a porch, a kitchen with sunlight, a space where no one would track my steps or judge my routines. I found a one-bedroom cottage on the edge of town, with a blue door and ivy curling along the back fence. The owner, Dorothy, was a widow who loved crossword puzzles and served homemade lemonade to everyone who visited. We chatted for an hour on her porch before she handed me the keys, saying, "I think this place will be good to you." I moved out quietly, no fuss or fanfare. I folded my sweaters carefully, packed my books, and wrapped the photo of Thomas and me from our Cape Cod trip in soft cloth. I didn't leave a note, I didn't owe them one. Daniel helped carry my boxes. Claire stayed away, and I wasn't surprised. When he set the last box down in my new living room, he paused, looking around. He said the cottage felt peaceful, like it fit me. I offered him tea, but he shook his head. He seemed like he wanted to say something deeper but couldn't find the words. I let the silence linger, we'd said enough for now. As he stepped outside, he turned back and said, "Thank you, not for the past, but for how I'd handled the end of it." I closed the door softly behind him, locked it, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at home. The first morning in my cottage, I woke just before dawn, stirred not by duty but by something softer, maybe curiosity, or a calm I hadn't felt in ages. The air was cool and quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like an embrace, not loneliness. I stretched slowly under my quilt, in no hurry to get up, with no footsteps echoing in the hall, no hum of hidden cameras. I was unseen, unjudged, and that made the moment feel holy. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, the old hardwood creaking under my steps, and I didn't tense at the sound. There was no one to chide me for making noise too early. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and hummed an old lullaby I used to sing to Daniel when he was small enough to hold tight against my side. The melody filled the room, soft but full. While the water warmed, I opened the back door and stepped outside. The garden was a wild mix of ivy, rosemary, and flowers I didn't know the names of yet. Dew sparkled on the grass in the early light. There were no fences cutting off the view, just a gentle slope of land fading into trees. I breathed it in deeply. Later that morning, I unpacked my books, arranging them not by size or color, but by memory. I placed the novels from my college days on the lower shelf, the gardening guides I'd barely opened in the middle, and my beloved poetry books, my quiet indulgence, near the armchair by the window. When I stepped back, the shelves didn't look staged. They looked lived in, like they belonged to someone with a story. By the third day, I'd settled into new habits. I ate when I felt hungry, not when the house demanded a schedule. I napped without guilt. I kept a little journal by the kitchen sink, jotting down things that warmed my heart, a blue jay perched on the windowsill, the way sunlight danced across the kitchen tiles in the late afternoon, the soft patter of rain on the roof like gentle fingertips. These moments used to get lost in the clamor of everyone else's needs, but now they were mine to hold. At the Sunday market, I picked up a handmade wind chime with ceramic leaves that caught my eye. I hung it by the back door, where its uneven melody danced in the breeze. The sound wasn't perfect, but it kept the quiet from feeling too heavy. I started jotting short notes to myself, little reminders of who I'd been before I became a backdrop in someone else's world. They were brief, just phrases like, "You're seen here," or, "You don't owe your life to anyone." 10 days after I settled in, Daniel brought the kids over. They tore through my little garden like it was an enchanted woods, their laughter bouncing off the trees. I let them pluck flowers and get dirt smudged on their knees. No one hovered behind me, muttering about messes or manners, just me, my grandkids' giggles, and the faint citrusy scent of lemon verbena drifting from the yard's edge. When it was time to go, Daniel lingered, his eyes holding mine a moment longer than usual. "You look at peace," he said. I nodded, the words settling warmly in my chest. I told him I was learning to rest, not the exhausted collapse after a day of serving others, but a true, gentle rest in a space I'd chosen, in a life I'd carved out for myself. In the evenings, I'd light candles, not to set a mood for anyone else, but because I loved their soft glow and warmth. I read poetry out loud, even if the only audience was the quiet room. I sang while folding laundry, my voice carrying without hesitation. I ate dessert before dinner, just because I could. I found an old typewriter at a thrift shop and started tapping out little stories, savoring the sharp click of the keys. I wasn't chasing usefulness anymore, I was chasing joy. There were moments when the past crept in. I'd pass a mirror and remember that tiny red light blinking in the ceiling. I'd hear Claire's voice from that video, her mocking chuckle. Those memories didn't cut me anymore. They sharpened my perspective, reminding me how far I'd walked from that place. My cottage didn't have fancy art or smart lights that turned on with a word, but it had windows that swung wide to let the breeze flow through. It had books with creased pages and worn spines, proof they'd been loved. It had a table where I set out tea, fresh bread, and letters from friends. Its silence wasn't hollow, it was full, alive with my presence. I stopped worrying about unseen eyes. There was no script to memorize, no role to perform. I wasn't the dutiful guest or the invisible helper in someone else's story anymore. I'd shed those old layers like a coat too heavy for spring. My cottage was small, but inside its walls, I grew. Every corner carried my touch, not because I was cautious, but because I was finally free to leave my mark. I didn't wait for anyone to notice me. I didn't hope for gratitude. I was living, fully and freely. For the first time in years, every inch of my space was exactly what I needed, private, chosen, entirely mine.